Alrighty, so welcome to yet another Jeep video. Alright, so we've spent a little bit of time off camera arguing with rusty bolts. We won the argument. Actually, our Milwaukee grinder won the argument. But what we're going to be doing today is we're going to be pulling the fuel tank and replacing the fuel tank skid plate and doing the lift kit at the same time. And now let me tell you why we're doing these at the same time. Now, the shocks on these things are notoriously hard to get to. And if you can see them, they are right in this general area right here. Fuel tank is right next to them. So what you end up doing is you end up kind of messing around with the fuel tank, trying to get those bolts out, and then you break the bolts, and then you got to drill the bolts and everything else. If the fuel tank is out of it, I'm spitting everywhere. I got to slow down. If you break the bolts and you have to drill them out, you got to drop the fuel tank anyway. So we're just going to go ahead and drop the tank out and get to the shocks, make our lives a whole lot easier, put the fuel tank aside. We'll get all that done, and we won't have to fight too hard, because then we can get the torch up in there. We can get the bolts out without destroying everything. It just makes life a whole lot easier. So I am now going to lower this tank out of here, and hopefully I'll bring you guys over with us. You'll be able to see it. I don't know what angle you're going to want. Maybe this angle, because I will be standing in this general vicinity. So now we're just gonna drop this down. And we've already gone ahead and unbolted all of the fill tube and all the cables and wires and all the other crap that goes along with it. And I'm just gonna pull this plastic flap down over here just to make sure that we don't have anything dragging. So far we don't. And what I'm praying is that this fuel tank doesn't have a whole lot of fuel in it. But you never know. And what this does have, being a 2004, is the damn canister. So let's get all this stuff off of the top of the tank. There's those lines. All right, now that everything is free moving, we can drop this down a little bit further. All right, so now we got our fuel filler neck. You have to twist. It'll come out eventually. If we're lucky. There we go. There's a tube in there for the evap system that makes these super hard to get out. Alright, so we got another vent tube over here. You guys probably saw that and you're probably screaming, "Get that tube off of there!" Well, that's what we're doing. And if there's not a whole lot of fuel in here, which there's a whole lot of fuel in there, we are going to have to empty that before I lift it out of there, because I don't feel like hurting myself today. So why don't we get that done? All right, all the fuel is out of the tank now, and we ended up siphoning it out and just waiting for it. Now, there's three ways you can do this. Number one is to be a hero and hurt yourself. Number two is to phone a friend, which you guys know we don't have too many people around here on a daily basis. Option three is to siphon the gas out. I took option three. And even though it takes a little bit more time, if you get close enough to it and you get enough of the fumes, by the time it's done draining, you don't even remember what your name is. And never mind the fact that you just spent a half an hour draining a fuel tank. So option 3 is a pretty good one. You just have to remember what it is that you're doing when you're done with it. So basically what we're going to do now is we're literally just going to lift it out of the skid plate. And with any luck, yeah, comes right out. Alright, so now that we got that out, I'll show you how bad this freaking thing is. Look at that. Horrible. Rotted right through. Big holes. All kinds of stuff. So now we're gonna fix that. And then up in here is where our shocks are bolted. Right here. And now with the tank out, we can see that. We can access the top side of it. We can get some PB blaster up in there, let those soak, and get the shocks out without really much of an issue. And you see this whole area up in here is still really, really good shape. We can clean all this stuff up. We can shoot a coat of paint on it so that it doesn't have an issue later on down the road. We can make sure that the insides of our frame on the rear are good, which they look to be pretty amazing. So we got super lucky there. And now all we got to do is just kind of soak this thing down, and I'll bring you guys back when it's time to start putting the lift in. And there we go. The tank is back in the new skid plate, and you can see it is a genuine Mopar unit. Got the old straps in place. Looking pretty good. Now onto the shocks. So it is the next day. We were going to do some more yesterday, but we had to go ahead and watch the 2.4 hours of Le Mullets, which awesomely enough, Brent from PFI Speed and Jamie from PFI Speed won that race, which is incredible. Couldn't have happened to two better people. I don't know if you guys watched it, but wait till it comes out on YouTube if you didn't pay for the pay-per-view and see it. It was a really, really funny race. But anyway, these shocks have been soaking overnight, so we're going to attempt... Man, I gotta grease this thing. It's terrible. We're going to attempt to knock these bolts out of here without using any heat. I don't know if we're going to be able to, but I'm going to go grab a light so you guys can see better. Okay. So, these two bolts right here, 1 and 2. We're going to attempt to get these out of here. Not looking good. Nope. We're going to need to heat those, which we will do because the fuel tank's not in here. So yay. So let me grab the torch and get these things out of here. All right. Fire this thing up. Alrighty, there's 2 of them. Let's see if we can get the other 2. this last one might be the deal breaker here. Let's see. There's all 4 of them, and that's one way to remove a spring, by the way. Just let her rip, tater chip. So, now that we got those out, we can do what we need to do. Alright, you guys are probably wondering one thing. When the axle fell and dropped like that, why didn't you just take the bolts out of the bottom of the shock first and then do the uppers? Well, very simple reason for that. Up on top of that cross member that sits up here, there are welded in nutserts, and those nutserts tend to spin. So you break them off, they spin up inside the frame, and you're done. You cannot get any further. You have to basically cut everything out, weld in new studs, and go through the whole rigmarole. So what I found in the years of doing this is that if I leave the pressure from the axle pulling down on those bolts, it helps to keep those welded nutserts in place as I'm trying to back these bolts out, especially since after I've heated everything up and now everything is super soft, and when I go to spin them, it spins the nut right out of the nutsert. And if I keep the downward pressure of the axle on it, it helps to hold those in place, and then we can actually back the bolts out without destroying the nutserts and the welds and everything else that are up in there. So, a little tidbit of info on why I did it that way. But another thing I wanted to bring to your guys' attention real quick is you guys are always saying to me, how much is this? How much does a job like this cost? And I cannot give you an estimate on the internet until I've seen full photographs, at least photographs of every aspect of your Jeep or your Silverado, your Tacoma, or whatever. I cannot make a determination based upon, hey, my frame's rotted, how much does it cost? That being said, the last 8 bolts that we've taken out of this thing, we've had to use the torch on. So just to give you an idea of that, for a Jeep that comes normally apart, no problem, whatever, you know, it takes a couple hours to do these things. With a Jeep where every single nut and bolt has to be hit with the torch, it's a lot more time, it's a lot more labor, it's a lot more of everything. So, with that being said, no, I cannot give you an estimate without first seeing everything that is wrong with your vehicle. And then even that estimate is not going to be 100% accurate until I have your vehicle here and we see what's going on with it. All right, now all that crap is out of the way. What we're going to do next, and probably see a little bit better with some light, but these spring pads, spring perches, are going to be what we're tackling next. So these look to be in pretty solid shape. There's a little bit of scaly surface rust on it. We hit it with the needle scaler, got all that out of there. We're going to treat and paint this. And then also the lower section here where the lower spring goes, now is the perfect time to also treat that to stop it from rusting. Because guys, listen, this Jeep is from an island and it's going back to an island, and it's going to be, you know, exposed to not only salt water, but snow, salt, ice, seawater, you name it, this Jeep gets exposed to it. So no matter what, we're going to have rust issues, but what we're going to try to do with this is mitigate them as quickly as possible and for as long as possible. So we're going to go ahead and shoot some self-etching primer and a little bit of black Rust-Oleum just to kind of help this rust. Up here, we're going to do a rust converter just to kind of convert that rust so that we can paint on it. And hopefully that will take care of any future rust issues in the spring area. But that's what we're going to do now. So I'm going to paint these up. We are, by the way, we are ready to put the rear springs in. We're ready to put the rear shocks in. So as soon as the paint dries that I'm about to shoot on here, we're going to go ahead and get the springs and the shocks in. Okay, so progress is being made. We got, I don't even know where we left off. It's been so long, but we did the whole shock thing. We did all that. And the goal for tonight was to actually get the frame painted, get everything situated, and get the lift kit installed. And then this way we can put the fuel tank back in and we can do everything else. And I apologize. I'm so lost right now. I don't even remember where we left off with the last clip. But anyway, we got everything back together for the most part. We got everything primed up. We got everything painted. And we went with a flat paint on this frame. And the reason being, now normally I use a semi-gloss paint. Semi-gloss paint looks pretty, makes everything look nice, but nothing sticks to it, which is kind of what we want for this Jeep. Being that it lives on an island, we're going to want a paint surface that will stick to things like oil coatings or the infamous fluid film that I always use. So when the customer gets this back, basically what I'm going to tell them is, listen, let the paint cure for a month or so, or maybe a little bit less, couple of weeks, and then throw a coat of fluid film on this entire frame and the axles and everything else that's potentially going to get rusty, and that'll save everything. And then flat paint will actually give it a surface to actually bind to. So flat paint in this scenario is going to work out a lot better. But frame is painted from the back all the way to the front, inside and out. We made sure that we treated everything that we could. We even treated the rear axle because that was getting kind of nasty. So wire brushed it all down, hit it with a little bit of sandpaper in certain areas, hit it with the needle scaler where we needed to, and then blasted a couple of coats of primer, a couple of coats of paint, and it is looking good. So hopefully in the next couple hours we're going to let this paint cure up a little bit, and then from there we're going to install the springs, the shocks in the rear. Then we're going to move to the front and we're going to do the front end. And then once that is done, we can throw the fuel tank back in it and we can start putting this thing back together. We can put the exhaust on it, we can put the skid plate on it, but we may hold off a little bit because we have a couple more odds and ends to do. But that is where we're at this point. So I know you guys tuned in for a lift kit and a fuel tank skid plate, and you're getting a whole lot more, because before we can do any of that stuff, this is what we got to do. So we will get on to the lift kit very shortly. So it is time to install the springs, and we're going to show you a little trick that I use here to get these in, and it's in the form of the bottle jack from my 20-ton press. Now normally you're going to be fighting and struggling to get this spring in here because it only goes in about yay far, and you're going to be prying, and then eventually you'll try to get your control arms out, and then you got to fight the control arms to get those back in, and it's just an absolute nightmare. So what we do, or what I do, is you take a bottle jack and you just start pushing the axle down. Now the only thing you want to do is make sure as you're pushing this sucker down, you don't go too far. You can easily go too far and completely max out your control arms and cause all sorts of issue. So you just kind of ease it down. And then check your spring, see if you can fit it in there yet. We're getting a whole lot closer. So we'll go a little bit more. You feel it getting a little bit resistant. So you don't want to go too crazy. Just enough to where you can set the spring, twist it. Once we've got it in the pocket there, we'll leave a little bit more pressure. And then we can use a pry bar to get it the rest of the way in. So we take the pry bar, come in back here. We should be able to send it right in, if we're lucky. Sometimes you don't get lucky. There we go. Just like that, it's in. And then we can relieve the pressure. Now we can hopefully pull our jack out of here. Yeah. There we go. We pull our jack out. Always do the driver's side first, because that is the tough one. Passenger side should go in without any issue, because it's on the opposite side of the track bar. So let's see how this one goes. Should just be able to push down on the axle. Yep, that one slides right in. So now you're probably saying to yourself, well, Justin, why didn't you just remove the track bar? Well, if you saw what these bolts look like, you wouldn't want to remove the track bar either. So now we got the springs in. We're going to go ahead and hook our shocks up at the top. So let's put this thing up in the air and get the shocks in. So if you guys remember, we had a heck of a time getting these bolts out. These guys here, these are for the shocks. And what we're going to do is, before we go and put these back in, we're going to hit them with a little bit of the old Tin Man maker. Those of you that have used anti-seize know what I'm talking about. And we're going to start with the one closest to the frame and get it started, because once you have the shock in there, it's kind of difficult to get in there with anything, and we're going to do that on both sides. So I'll give these another shot. Put that on the passenger or the frame side. And then we're going to get them run in just about to the end. If I can find my tools. There we go. This one, everything's falling. Everything's falling on the ground. All right, so let's see if we can find the 13mm that we had earlier. All right, so we'll take and run this bolt in about that far. We need just enough room that we can slide the shock over. And I'll show you what that looks like in a sec, as soon as I grab that shock. All right, so here's what the top of the shock looks like. And you can see it's got these little tabs here, and all we really want to do is be able to slide that in there around the bolt, and that'll stay. And then we can take our other bolt here, give it a little Tin Man, get it started. And then do the same on the other side. This is copper Tin Man. And United Alloys need to get at me because I'm running out of this stuff. So let's get one on the other side. Let's grab the shock. We'll do the same thing on this one, is we'll run it up almost all the way. Then we'll throw on the shock. And we'll get our other bolt in there and started. Now we can snug everything up. And you do have a little bit of movement in there, so I suggest that you move the shock all the way as far over this way as you can so that you have room to get tools up in there. Be somewhat gentle with these bolts, you know, use your Shira torque instead of your He-Man torque, because you can break these pretty easy. So get this one tightened up. There we go. And now we got to lift the axle up a little bit and bring it to the shocks so that we can actually assemble our shocks in the proper location. Rise up. Okay. So now we can take the handiest tool ever invented. We'll start with the passenger side. I don't even know if you guys can hear me. Well, the microphone on the GoPro is not the greatest, but try to give you some more working angles here. Now what I noticed with these things is that these ears get sucked in from the old shocks. So I usually just take a hammer quick. Give them a little bit of love. You don't need much. Just a couple little taps, that should fit. And we're starting to get really light on the lift. So we got to be careful. Here's the bolts. Pop in a bolt. We'll hit that with a little Goldie. Throw a nut on that one. Yeah. I don't know if you guys can see this, but look. And it's super light on the lift. So you just got to be super careful. You know, safety third. Now we can move to the old driver's side. And do the exact same old thing. Use a little love tap. We don't have too far to go on the driver's side because the track bar holds it up. Sometimes you got to give them a little love tap. And wet that side down. And then you take an 18 and a 15, tighten up the shocks, and our rear suspension lift will be done. Alright, so that's pretty much it for the suspension lift. We got all of our components painted. Springs are in. Shocks are in. See how much easier that was without the fuel tank in the way? Because we did end up having to heat these up to get them out. So having the fuel tank out is key. Not only are we using fuel or using fire in the area of the fuel tank, it's just not a good idea to do it with the tank in it. So we managed to get those bolts out. We got those threads cleaned up. Shocks went in perfectly. Spring on this side is good. The whole rest of the frame is painted. And now we get to move on to the front, which the front is going to be fun and interesting because it is super duper rotted. The shock mounts down at the bottom here. These bolts, there's not much left of the nuts on the bottom, so it's going to be interesting trying to get this apart, trying to get the top of the shock off. But I'll give you the steps that we're going to go through to install this, and then, you know, we'll go from there. Okay, so the front can go one of two ways. Either it's going to go smoothly, or it is going to injure your pride and your manhood and everything you stand for, which is what this one's looking like it's about to do. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to remove the sway bar link on both sides, and then we're going to tackle the shock. So the shock has one giant, well not giant, but a nut up here and two bolts down here. And then the sway bar link, that's all we're disconnecting, hopefully. Now, I say that because of all the rust and the rot and everything else in this general area. We might have to get a little bit creative. We might not have to get a little creative. It all depends what's going to come apart, what's not going to come apart. So hopefully we can get this shock out of here without, I don't know. It doesn't look too good. We might have to cut that shock out. We might have to cut these bolts down at the bottom. We might have to cut the sway bar. I don't know. We'll figure it out. But first things first is we're going to try the sway bar link. So if this tells you anything, these sway bar link nuts are 15s. That's a 14. That just tells you how rusted this stuff is. So hopefully we can get it off without having to burn everything off. Alright, so we managed to get that one. You saw I was going back and forth, and that will literally just allow the penetrating oil to do its thing. So you get it to move, spray it, get it to move a little more, spray it. I'm gonna go do the other side. Man, we got lucky and both sides came out. So the next thing we need to do, get the light out of our way. These are tapers. They're like a tie rod end or a ball joint or whatever. They're tapered into the actual sway bar. That's what allows you to get that nut off of there, but it also poses a problem in the fact that you have to break that taper. Now, in order to not ruin the sway bar link, you can do it just like you would do a ball joint or a tie rod end, and you can hit the bar and hopefully break that bond. So let's give that a shot, see if we can knock that out. there we go. We got that side. We're gonna go do the other one. My God, can you guys hear the rain? Listen. It's insane out there right now. Like a tornado. But anyway, we decided to go for the chop and hammer method because I knew for a fact we weren't getting those things out of there. So, chopped them right up, knocked it out. Now we just got to get the bottom bolts out. And again, we use the same trick for the front springs, which are ungodly difficult if you don't do this. And you kind of twist them up into place, get them about where you need them. And once you're in the vicinity, you can move the camera out of the way and just keep knocking the jack down. Until we get where we need to be, which we're getting pretty close. Almost there. A little bit more. You just got to keep an eye on this brake line. Turn the wheel if you have to. Relieve some stress on that. And we'll just keep going. And just be aware that you are maxing out your control arms. And you do have to be careful. You can't just go crazy with this because you'll bend a bunch of crap. But in order to do these, if you don't do this, you have to pull the control arms and a whole bunch of other stuff has to get done. And it's not fun. So now we can rotate. Bang. Pop them right in. Make sure it's sitting in its little home. And then remove the jack. Just like that, the front's done. Except for the shocks. We can't do the shocks yet because we ended up having to use the smoke wrench on all the bolts for the bottom. We started out with 13mm bolts and we ended up smashing an 11mm socket on them. And that was still not good enough, so ended up using the smoke wrench to get those off of there. And so we need to get some new hardware in the morning. So that is it for this evening. I think I'm gonna go relax for a bit. It is Sunday night. And then tomorrow morning, fresh, we'll go get some hardware for these shocks. We'll finish up the lift kit. And then it's all golden from there. We just got to put it back together. Put the skid plate up, exhaust on, trans cooler lines. We got a few other odds and ends that we got to do. The new exhaust. So we'll be busy for most of the day tomorrow getting this thing knocked out, but it's what we got to do. These things come in sometimes and they are, let's just say, hurt and need to be fixed. So that's what we're going to do. So we'll see you guys tomorrow once this lift is fully installed. All right, so we got our new shock bolts and we are now just finishing up putting in the last little bit of the front shocks, and then the suspension kit will be completely done. Then we can get to putting on the putting fuel tank back in it, put the skid plate back on, put the exhaust back together. You know, all the stuff that we did in the first video where it showed the detailed version of taking it apart, we're just going to do the detailed version of putting it back together. So get these shocks all tightened up. And we'll be good. And then all we're going to do is we're going to pop this thing back on the ground. And once we get it back on the ground, this is where you know, everything goes back together. So right now, all the control arms in the rear are still loose. And the reason being is because you always want to set the vehicle down on its weight, get it off of the lift, get the suspension at ride height, and then tighten up all your bushings. So this way you get, you know, your flex in your bushing is going to move with the control arm. What you don't want is to have it sagged all the way down, tighten it up, and then when you pinch it, you're going to twist your bushing, and it'll stay twisted and it'll destroy it. So a good rule of thumb is put it back down on the ground, tighten up all your control arms, make sure everything is good, and then you can go from there. You won't have excess bind in your control arms, plus the vehicle is going to sit a little bit lower than it would if all your bushings were bound up, and everything will just last longer. So we're going to go ahead and finish up the lift kit. All we have to do is put it on the ground, put the sway bar links back on, and tighten the rear control arms, and that'll be completely done. We're going to throw in the fuel tank, and this one's going to be good. So I really hope you guys enjoyed these last two videos. It took a lot of time to make these videos. It literally, when I make a video on a Jeep like this, it takes me almost double the amount of time that it would normally take me to get one of these things done. So I really hope you guys enjoyed the videos. But yeah, so that's basically installing a 2.5-inch lift kit and replacing the gas tank skid plate. And I'll see you guys in the next one, which will probably be... a few days ago, we did a conversion to the dash on my Dodge to go from green to blue, and we ran into some hurdles. Those hurdles you guys will see. We overcame them, so we're good. So stay tuned for that one, and I'll see you soon. Have a great day, everybody.